Welcome to the third quarter of the Paddock The Goals today. And today we're so grateful to have experienced clinical psychologist David Younger join us. David, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, David will be presenting some community recovery sessions at Charlton on Wednesday and Sea Lake on Thursday of next week, the north and south points of our shire, to help us bounce back. David, you've played an important part in the recovery of so many communities in the wake of disasters. Can you tell us a little bit about your most memorable experiences during this time?
I can. Actually, it's hard to think of, the most memorable experiences because there have been so many. But what does come to mind, I think, are working with and supporting those communities where, really amidst incredible hardship and adversity and often or sometimes trauma and challenge, are born a lot of strengthened or new community relationships. But within those community relationships, what I have seen happen many times over are new community organisations come about, sort of formed out of the disaster and, aimed at supporting the community ongoing over the long term. So I guess that's generally speaking. But as some specific examples, what really comes to mind is one of the community dinner initiatives that came out of the 2009 Victorian bushfires, where up in Kinglake some community members got together and decided that it would be good to put on a dinner for community members once a week. And that actually ran for many, many years after the fires. And I've heard through community members about just how incredibly beneficial being able to go to those dinners and feel supported by other community members was. And then just another example that comes to mind that's more recent, coming out of the last year's floods actually in New South Wales, and having visited Lismore on an occasion, hearing about the incredible community-based recovery efforts coming out of Resilient Lismore, a community organisation that's come together. And there are just countless other memorable experiences, I guess, and examples like those ones.
It does remind us that community connectedness, it's essential to recovery. The Loc historically has had one of the highest participation rates in active sports in the state, and it's also mentioned amongst the highest for volunteering. So we should be well poised to bounce back pretty quick, hopefully. However, COVID-19 really set us and everyone back, not just in Paddock, but across the state. Our communities are telling us that they're experiencing high rates of volunteer fatigue right now due to current volunteers needing to pick up other activities and have stepped away. Can you help us understand what some of the underlying factors might be contributing to that fatigue and what we can do to actively turn it around?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's probably many factors which will be dependent upon the community and the area and the disaster event, etc. But certainly what we commonly talk about are the short and the medium as well as long-term impacts of stress. And then to drill down into a little bit more detail, we often talk about different states of stress. So, for example, if we're talking about a disaster like floods, typically there is the lead up to the day and then the day or the days and weeks, depending on what occurs. And when that takes place, it's a normal human response to go into a survival state of functioning and to experience a lot of adrenaline and use a lot of energy in a very short period of time. Now, that in and of itself can lead to tiredness and fatigue, but probably what's really, really relevant in a disaster recovery context is then what comes after the event, the sort of the everything else period or personal recovery journey that community members come into contact with and experience. And this is where we sort of link in with and talk about a second state of stress that we refer to as the endurance mode of functioning, which is a little bit like preparing to run a marathon, except you just don't know that you're running a marathon. And in that state, you're also using a lot of energy. The body is great at adapting and it will give us access to energy we wouldn't otherwise get access to. So what happens over time, and it doesn't have to take too long, and then bearing in mind that before the floods even occurred, there were relatively high levels of fatigue throughout communities in Australia and general society, is that energy levels and energy reserves run low. So that's actually a very big reason for the high levels of fatigue and exhaustion that are right through disaster-affected communities and the society in general. But the other big factor I would mention is the factor of connection. social connection, and that coming out of COVID, unfortunately, some communities just haven't fully yet reconnected. And connection is nourishing and supportive, and often involves involvement in pleasurable, fun activities.
Let's hope there's a lot of people at the sports today at the North Central Football League that are taking that opportunity to connect with people they haven't seen at their club and their opposition club today, and getting some of that upswing. 50% of our agricultural area in Paddock was impacted by the floods last year. We've seen a moderate uptake of the community flood recovery financial support, and we often hear our farmers say, as they do, that someone else needs it more than me. What is your experience with farmers, David? And if at all, what are you hearing and seeing from farmers?
Yeah, I guess there's experience and experiences. The first experience was working with farmers coming out of the dairy milk crisis in Victoria back in, I think that was 2017 approximately, which caused a significant shock through that community and an inordinate amount of stress. I guess the experiences more broadly, though, have been coming into contact with rural communities and primary producers right through the country after various disaster events. And if I just share something for a moment, a trip last year through rural Queensland from Mount Isa to Townsville, where we spent time with predominantly farming communities affected by the 2019 inland monsoonal flooding event. What became really, really clear to us was that, I guess we use this word in Australia, but stoicism is really strong in rural communities. But it was just so completely apparent to us that it's important to be stoic. It's important to be resilient given the challenges that rural communities face without even taking into consideration disasters. But what we also saw was that just as stoicism, when it comes through as there are people worse off than me or us, is that just as that's helpful, it can also be unhelpful, because what it does result in and contribute to is farmers not actually seeking help when they really need it and when they're deserving of it. And they can have a tendency to minimise their challenges, difficulties, even their traumas. This is definitely one of the identified reasons for higher mental health rates and lower levels of well-being in some rural communities. So it becomes important to find all sorts of down-to-earth, acceptable ways to connect with farmers and to help them see that they have a right to access help and support, but that doesn't even have to be formal support. That can just be informal support and talking to another farmer or community member or a wife or family member, and just once in a while getting things out on the plate in the open.
If this discussion today has made any of our listeners feel like they may need support, please do avail yourself to that formal support or, as David said, that informal support with your peers as well. In towns as well, David, our businesses are also impacted, of course, with a reduction of trade and what have been some of the positive ways that other communities have supported local businesses to help them bounce back as well. And I guess this probably even goes back through the COVID-19 experience back from 2020 as well.
Yeah, I saw a great example of this just 2 weeks ago, also in Queensland in Gympie. And if anybody knows Gympie, Gympie has a long history of flooding over the last 150 years, probably 10 significant floods. And their main street, Mary Street, in the most recent floods, flooded almost 3/4 of the way up, and that's the central business district. But I was invited to go along to the Gympie Business Breakfast, which occurs once a month, about 6 a.m, through to, I think it was about 8 o'clock, something like that. And it was an incredibly cohesive, supportive group is what I found, probably about 80-odd business members there. And amidst this event, or regular event, which was focused on community connection and supporting business owners, they'd organised for key speakers to come along and talk, and speakers talking about different particular topics, but there were sort of connections and interconnections between or amidst the themes. I could really see that there was a lot of support in the room, but there were a lot of helpful ideas being generated as well that were supportive of the ongoing challenges that business community was experiencing, amidst knowing full well there will be another flood at some point in the future.
That's a tremendous idea and initiative. I'm pinching that, and that sounds really worthwhile. Um, what are the stages of recovery, David? We're now 9 months post the event. What do we need to be on the lookout for? What issues linger, and what do we need to stay mindful of?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a tricky one, this one, but, we'll sort of narrow it down to key points. I say it's tricky because it used to be that there was just one event and then there was 5 to 10 years to recover after that before the next one. But the goalposts seem to have changed, of course, with one event after another. So I just start out this way because what I want to highlight is that there isn't necessarily anymore just one step, two step, three step, really clear phases one after another, although there are some really key themes that exist, in the first year and the second year and the third year. So perhaps if I mention those and say that the first year is typically characterized by, the ending of that adrenaline phase and a lot of disruption in life, disruption to normal daily habits and routines. And that the first year can go by in the blink of an eye for many community members, with the first anniversary then coming up before they sort of even realise it or give much thought to it. And that first anniversary or the end of the first year, of course, also coincides with the season that the disaster event occurred in. So that can be quite triggering. And if community members have not been able to give thought to that or prepare for it, they can inadvertently, be triggered and get a little bit caught out. But then around about that time, energy levels are starting to run low and communities are then into the second year. And what we've noticed is that it just dipping into the second year that it becomes quite clear and apparent to some community members that there's still a long way to go. But they're feeling tired and fatigued and just wondering where they're going to get the energy from. But they tell us it also feels like not having a choice about being able to stop. So they keep going, because there are still many things to do. Just a very simple example, of course, is the length of time it takes to repair or rebuild a home or put fences back on a farm. That can easily take 2 or 3 years. And so when we go past the second year, we start talking about this enduring state of stress and the tiredness coming through. But then eventually, if we go 2 or 3 years down the track, disruption has settled and people are starting to find their feet again, hopefully. But then many community members will find that that's the time when they first truly stop. And then a lot of things that they haven't had time or energy to consider suddenly hit them. These can be relationship issues that have been put to the back, but things sort of catch up. And then there's a period of time of working through that. So I guess I'm like painting a picture there of a 3, 4, 5 year cycle, actually, not for everybody, but, definitely for some portions of the community and depending on their experiences.
You'll be aware that our rural communities are in desperate need of more medical and mental health support services. How does this impact on community recovery, and what can we do as a community to help each other out?
Yeah, I think it impacts because there is the full awareness for many people that services are quite limited, and people can start to feel, communities can start to feel like they're forgotten or not being supported enough. And or if there's somebody has a crisis, who are they going to turn to? And these are all, of course, really valid experiences to have. So I guess what it can do sometimes is undermine people's and undermine the community's sense of confidence about the right sort or appropriate sort of mental health or other formal healthcare support being there. But what we can do and what communities can do, and this comes through now from really the global research and literature, but coupled with the real life recovery experiences of communities, is focus on the importance of strengthening community connections, like through sporting groups, for example, that you mentioned at the start of this podcast, and people coming out, spending time together, talking about everyday stuff, of course, but also talking about maybe the events of the day and what they went through, but also what their recovery journey is like. Because if I just mention this as a last point, what is also known and understood is that the majority of people by far do recover and find a way through a big natural disaster event, and that it's the smaller proportion of people that require that formal mental health or other formal support services. And so, if the majority are doing well, there's a really good place for them to be able to support the others that are struggling and not doing so well. And aside from all of that, I would say to anybody listening or people out there, just because you hear that services don't have vacancies or aren't available or there aren't enough of them, don't allow that to lead you to not even trying to book in with the service or not even trying to make an appointment. Put yourself on a wait list, because sometimes what happens is there are cancellations and you'll get in before you know it. The other thing to bear in mind, and I know it's not suitable for everybody, is telehealth and distance services. That has opened up availability a little bit to health professionals around the country.
All great salient advice, David. Thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon on the Paddock the Goals. And just a reminder that David will be presenting community recovery sessions in both Charlton next Wednesday and Sea Lake next Thursday. So do jump on Council's social media and website for full details about those sessions. And if you are available to come, we'd love to see you there. And I look forward to seeing you there. David, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.